Hi everyone, I'm Judy Niemeyer and I'm going to show you today the paper piecing steps to the Tea Time Placemats. Alright, this was a three-part video. The first part is the paper piecing, the second part was done live, and the third part is how to put the binding on. The second part was actually about putting the vein in. So anyway, this is our paper piecing one, and I'm gonna start. One of the things you guys need to do is if you get your pattern, you need to read through the whole instructions, and if you don't understand something, just highlight it and don't worry about it, because once you get to that part and you have to do something with it, things are going to lead up to the steps that are required to make your quilt and to complete that pattern. In your pattern you have foundation sheets. I've already pre-cut all the foundation sheets for this actual demo. You also have what we call template layout sheets, and I've already pre-cut the layout sheets, and you'll notice that there's fabric pinned to the bottom side of the layout sheets. So those instructions, we've already skipped past that part as well. So I'm going to set these papers off to the side for a minute, and where we're going to start with this video is how we actually cut the foundation papers and how to stack to prepare for paper piecing. So I'm going to explain to you what a template layout sheet is for those of you that are new and never seen this. Basically what we do is we take a pattern, and once we create a pattern, we have to take all of the parts that are in the pattern. So you have section numbers, and we take each one of those section numbers and we build a template piece for them. We put a seam allowance around it. Then we take all of the sections and we try to put them back together on a sheet of paper that makes it easy for us to cut a strip of fabric. Okay. Sometimes we put a little bit more excess fabric around them because we consider them to be more of a beginner pattern, and sometimes they fit together pretty tight, and it's mostly because it's more of an advanced pattern that people normally won't pick up unless they've done 2 or 3 of our patterns previously. So this pattern that we're working with has always been considered one of our beginner patterns, and it's a pretty popular pattern. It's been on the market for about 7 years, I think, and it still is a really favorite for people who are looking for a small project to work with. So when we build our template pieces, we take each one of the section numbers, and if you look, our foundation papers have section 1, section 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to section 17 on this particular pattern. And you'll notice that we have this kind of looks shaded. We call that a hatch section. And the hatch section, those are all done with those pieces are all put together, and what we did is you can see that all the hatch templates are on one foundation template layout sheet, and all of the templates that are unhatched are put onto another template layout sheet. So the neat thing about a template layout sheet is you can cut as many layers of fabric underneath that one sheet as what you can cut through with your rotary cutter. I'll normally stack like 12 layers under a layout sheet, and anything over 12 layers I usually will use a second template layout sheet. So I'm only doing 2 layers under this because we've already done a couple of the pieces for so that we could set up the video stuff. So there's 2 layers of fabric underneath each one of these. So after you get your fabrics, you open up your fabrics and you position the layout sheets. Then you cut the fabric around the outside. Excuse me. The cut size of your fabric is always going to run anywhere from like 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch larger than the actual paper template And the reason we do that is because once you cut something out, it's a little bit harder to get everything to stack perfectly and get it to be the same size. So we always like to give you a little bit extra room just in case they don't stack up perfectly. All right. Then what I do is after I put this on, the way I put my sheets on, and I'm going to apologize that I did not bring you the glue stick that I use, but I use a repositionable glue stick. They're very common. You can buy them at any office store. You can get them online, and you just get a box of them. And it's a repositionable glue, and I just rub it to the back, put it on the back side of the paper, and then I can actually put the paper on the fabric. And you let it dry just a few seconds before you put it onto the fabric. And then when you pull the paper off the fabric, it actually removes all the glue because it's attached to the paper, and so it doesn't leave the residue on your fabric. And we use the repositionable glue when we're putting the paper onto our fabric. The other thing you need to notice is that on our foundation, on our templates, we have what we call a right side of the template, and then we have a wrong side, okay? The right side of our template is actually the printed side of the template. That actually, whenever you put a layout sheet onto your fabric, you need to make sure that the printed side is facing up on the fabric, and the fabric is facing up. If you put this onto the back side, everything will be a mirror image and they won't fit onto your papers. So always use a layout sheet unless it specifically tells you on your layout sheet to put it on the wrong side. Just assume that everything always goes right side. It goes on the right side of the fabric. Excuse me. So then after we get the layout sheet on, then I go around and I actually put paper clips on each of the sections around the edge of it, so that when I'm done, if I have like 7 or 8 layers under there, I don't have to worry about that fabric moving, and the paper clips will keep that together for me. All right. So now then I'm going to show you how we go about cutting them. If you look at your papers, they should always say cut line 1, and then there's going to be a cut line 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to the highest cut number. And what you're doing is when you're cutting, you're going to kind of pay attention to the template pieces. And normally what's going to happen, and it's not always true, but normally the first cut line is going to be next to the very last template piece. So as you're cutting, you can stack the templates in order as well. And then you don't have to try to figure out where your numbers are. So I always stack the very last section on this is section 17. So I'm going to show you how we cut. And if you cut off the line just a little bit, it's not going to make a lot of difference. Now, before I cut, the other thing I want to point out is once we add that 1/4 inch seam allowance around a template, and then you try to put it back together, you're always going to have excess fabric around those templates. And we usually try to add at least a 1/2 inch. We have a formula on how we design our templates, and so you're going to have a little bit of excess around all of the templates as well. Well, if you're going to put it on a piece, you're going to have some of these funny shapes like this, where all you're going to do is just try to fit them in somewhere. And so sometimes this is a small template here, but look at how much excess fabric is around it. The only reason why that is because that's just where that piece ended, and we wanted to cut this into a strip. All right. So the other thing that I want to bring to your attention is if it has a curved line on it, these dashed lines, that's actually that's your 1/4 inch seam allowance around it. You don't want to cut on those. What you're going to do is stay on these solid lines. And wherever that is, just leave it alone, because everything's going to leave it on there. It'll get trimmed off after you make these pieces, okay? So we're going to start here with my ruler. And I'm just going to slice. And there's my cut line 1. And I have a sew side written on here. And notice you're going to find that sew side, and where I'm at, I'm going to stack the sew side away from me, because what that does is it puts me in the same position in which I'm going to pick that fabric up and put it under the paper before I start sewing. So then we're going to come over here and we're going to find cut line 2, which is over here. Okay, and now we're going to find cut line 3. Now this happens to be one that's actually not set up in order, so I'm just going to scoot these pieces back like this for now. And then we're going to go to cut line 4, cut line 5, then we're going to go to cut line 6. And if you're wondering what these little samples of fabric are, is basically that's telling me what colors needed to be put underneath this layout sheet when I was doing my cutting out. I like to glue fabric swatches on the template layout sheets and on the foundation papers. So there's cut line 7. And then if I come over here, this is going to be cut line 8. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm looking at section 17. And so these are going to be every other number. So this one's going to be section 15. Then we go to 13, and notice I'm putting all of the sew sides in the order. Now we're going to go to number section 11. Then we go to section 9, go to section 7, 5, 3, and 1 doesn't have a sew side, but it's just going to go on the top of your pile, and I'll explain that later. So that just goes on top. So now we're going to find the other template layout sheet, which has the shaded pieces on, which we call hatching. So if you're reading an instructions and you wonder what the word hatching is, it's just a term for shading and paper your designs in CAD, which is where we do all of our design work, is in AutoCAD. So there's cut line 1. This one is cut line 2. This one here is cut line 3, cut line 4, 5, 6, and cut line 7. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to look at this. This one is actually 16. So I'm going to spread these out just a little bit. I'm just going to flip them over because I know those are in order. So this is section 17 there, and now this one is section 16, and it's going to go on top of 17. And I'm going to match the sew side. Then I'm going to pick this piece up. That's number 15. Then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to find section 14 and put that in my pile. And then we're going to go to section 13. Then we're going to go to 12. And then we're going to 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then I have my 1 on the top again. Okay, so all of my pieces are in my stacked order from the very last section we add to the first one. So let's say I had 12 pieces under there. I would put section 1 under all 12 of my papers before I would go to section 2, right? So I'm going to show you the chain piecing process. Now we're going to take our foundation papers, and on the back side of the foundation papers, on these particular units, there's actually a line that we call a basting stitch line, okay? We use this later on in the pattern because that's where we put our vein. But for now, what I want you guys to do is to flip your papers over, and you're going to mark that basting stitch line. And you can do that if you have a light table, or you can just put it up to the window. Just take a pencil or a black marker and actually mark that line, because what that's telling me is that's the bottom. I have to always make sure my fabric starts before that line, okay? And sometimes sometimes you use the edge of the paper as your guide, and other times you have to find a line within your foundation unit where you use that as the bottom of how to position your fabrics. The other thing we did here is in every one of our patterns, the very first sentence when it starts into the paper piecing is it always tells you to mark the dashed lines on the back side of your paper. Now that's optional. If you're new to paper piecing, you need to do this, because what it does is it shows you all of the sections on the back side of the paper. And since we actually are lining everything up on the back side and sewing on the front side, sometimes it really helps a beginner to be able to see where that piece has to, what area on your paper it has to cover. Okay, so we have all of our sections, and this happens to be my section 1, so you can see I have section 1, section 2, section 3. Now the other thing about paper piecing, if you're new, is one of the things you have to do when you design a pattern based on paper piecing is you sew the first piece on, then you sew the second piece, and everything has to be a continuous line. So you always have to start where it's section 1. You can't just start in the middle or on the end. You always have to start where section 1 and then work up to the largest number, right? So I use glue to adhere that first piece of fabric, because sometimes it's hard to, you can't just set it under there and you don't always know exactly where it's going to fit. And so I like to use glue to hold it on, and then I come back and do my trimming around it. So the very first piece, if you have a light table or you have a window, what you can do, because see, this piece is actually just sitting out in the middle here. When we design our templates, we also take into account how that fabric is going to look on your paper. And we try to set up all of our templates so that we keep grain line fairly consistent throughout the whole foundation. So as I'm looking through this, all of these pieces, the grain line is going to basically be running like this, because the way we position them onto the paper takes into account how they're going to sit on your foundation paper, the way they're positioned in your quilt, okay? And so all of these, the grain line is going to be following the sew line, all right? The reason we do that is because if you're working with striped fabric or things like that, you don't want to be able to just pick up a chunk of fabric, because your stripes might go this way and then this way and this way, and then, you know, you can flip things around. So when we're working with our the way they're set up on the paper, we like to make sure that everything's on grain line and that it's going to be consistent no matter whether you're working with a directional fabric or just a large print, all right? So the very first piece, it's hard to tell how to set that piece underneath there. And so what I like to do is I like to take that my template piece, and then I'm going to take my first piece of paper and I put it up to a light. Normally you can just hold it up to the light, and I match the actual template printed on the template to the area in which it's going to cover on my foundation paper. And so my solid line right here, that's my finish line. I match that up to the solid line on this side. And now I know that my grain line is going to be, or my directional fabric is going to be going in the same direction. So then I just take that and I leave that piece underneath there, and then they come in, and the very first piece you're going to flip wrong side up, and I set that first piece on here like this, and I'm actually going to start with my green. So if I'm doing a whole bunch, this really helps me get everything positioned correctly. So I'm going to put the green on top, and then I'm going to grab my glue stick, and this is called a Yoo-hoo stick. And I use this one because it works really well holding the paper and the fabric together. And a lot of the different types of glues, they all work a little bit different. So I'm going to lift this and kind of see where my section 1 sets, and I'm just going to put just a little bit of glue on there. I don't need to butter that. I just want a little glue, and then I'm going to take this piece, and because I've cut them out fairly close to the same exact size, I'm going to match it up to the paper underneath. And now I know that I've positioned this the same way in which I wanted the fabric to appear in that. Now I can actually take my sheet underneath it and the template out off the bottom, and I can match this fabric right up to the one underneath there and use that as my guide. And then I'm going to put my glue under this section here, and I'm going to put this down. So the other thing you want to pay attention to is you have to make sure that you don't change the order in which your pieces are stacked. So my very first color that I'm going to be working with is my pink, so that's always going to be number 1 page, and the second color is the green. Now, eventually you're just going to throw these away, the templates, but I don't throw them away until I know that I've done everything correct here. And then, so it doesn't hurt to just set them aside in a bag in case you make a mistake. It's easier to just go find a piece of fabric and use your template to cut a replacement piece of fabric for it. So just set those aside. I'm throwing it away because I know it's right. All right. So I have all this excess fabric, and I don't need this fabric here to complete what I'm doing. And the other thing I want you to notice is you're going to notice it's not covering the edge here. It's because there's another piece that's going to be coming in there to cover that, and it doesn't need to go out that far. But I don't like leaving all of the excess around, so I'm just going to quickly take this and trim this back just a little bit because it'll make it a lot easier for me to handle. All right. All right. So now we're going to start our paper piecing process. We have several sizes of rulers. We have one that's 18 inches. Then we also take our 18-inch ruler, and sometimes we cut it down, and you can actually buy a 12-inch add a quarter ruler as well. And we cut it down to 12 inches. And then that leaves me a 6-inch, and you can buy a 6-inch add a quarter ruler. So if you don't have somebody that's going to cut these down for you, you can actually purchase them now that way, because the gal that designed the add a quarter ruler does them in a 12-inch and a 6-inch length and an 18-inch length. I use all 3 of my sizes, and sometimes we even cut them at 10 inches or 9 inches and have 9-inch sizes. It's just that we use so many different sizes there. On this one, the reason I chose the 18 inches because some of my lines, when I fold my paper back, are going to be pretty long. So I want a ruler that's actually going to fit across those lines as I start doing the paper piecing. And I didn't want to have 6 rulers here, so we're just going to work with the 18-inch. Now, if I had been in my studio where I do all my sewing, I would have started with my little ruler and then worked up as I need my different sizes, all right? But we're just going to work with the large one, so it's going to seem a little awkward as I start cutting with this. We're going to take the very first piece here, and I'm going to pick this up, and I'm going to lay my fold template. Now, a fold template is just a piece of template plastic. This is, you can cut this out of anything. We buy template plastic, and then we cut a whole bunch of different lengths. So this one's actually 18 inches long. And I'm going to take that, and I'm going to place it right on line 1, which is right along here, all right? I'm going to take the foundation paper and I'm going to fold it back on that line. Okay, then I take my add a quarter ruler and I'm going to place it on there. Now realize that what we're doing here is we're cutting a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So a lot of people, when they teach paper piecing, they teach you to trim that after you sew it. We trim prior, and the reason why we trim prior is because we use what we call templates and a sew side, where a good portion of the paper piecing techniques that are out there are just done with chunks of fabric, and they just try to figure out where to set the next piece. Well, there's no figuring this out. It's very mathematical. It's going to fit the way it's designed. So I'm going to trim that line, and then I'm just going to set this piece off to the side like this, and then we grab the next piece, and again we're going to place it on line 1. Then you're going to fold the foundation paper back, you're going to put the add a quarter ruler on there, and you're going to trim. All right, we work with all different sizes of paper. Sometimes they're little pieces and sometimes they're great big pieces. So if this is irritating to you because you have all of this, one of the things you can actually do here is you can actually fold this up like this. And you can take a paper clip, and I'm going to steal one off of that stack there. And you can actually clip this. And it just makes it a lot easier. Now I'm working with a smaller piece. All right. So that's just a nice little trick for those of you that are beginners. So now that I have this one folded back, I'm going to stack it right on top here. So the next color I put on actually is my light fabric. Okay. And if I look at my template, this is where I have to have it underneath my section. And I'm going to put this one on top because I have that one is the one I drew on. All right, so I have a lot of this excess, but I'm not going to worry about that excess right now. This is where I need to cover, and if I'm looking at this section right here, this is section 2, which is the same exact size as these dashed lines. Okay, so all I have to do is remove this template, and I set it in front. This is my sew side. I'm going to lift this piece up, slide it underneath, and then I'm going to put my paper on top. And I'm going to double check and make sure that I have fabric, because I have to have fabric to that line. And so if I fold this back, I have plenty of fabric underneath there. I have more than enough fabric past this point, and I have more than enough past there. And so you may wonder, well, why do you have so much fabric there? It's because when we arranged everything on the layout sheets, remember, nothing fits back together perfectly. So we have to be able to get those pieces. Sometimes they have a lot of excess and sometimes they don't. And as we continue down our strips, some of these template pieces get bigger, right? So then I'm going to take my next piece of fabric and I'm just going to line it up. So if I look, I've got this started right here. So I'm going to actually take this one and start it in the same place. I'm going to set it back about 1/2 inch. I call it stagger. And then I'm going to pick up my next piece and I'm going to basically line up my paper. And I hold on to my fabrics with these fingers, and I always use these fingers here. And I position this one in the same exact place. And I'm using these fingers right here to hold this fabric down. And I start this stacking process. Now, I can stack anywhere from 2 up to 100 pieces just like this. And all I have to do is just, after I get them stacked, I just keep moving them. But one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to just move it to the edge. You have to have enough room there that you can get your fingers under there to pick that up. Okay? Because these are quite awkward pieces to work with to get started on this because the paper is so big, I like to teach my beginners how to glue this, and it makes it easier to handle. After you become more experienced with paper piecing, you're going to give up on the gluing the raw edges, and you're going to just pick it up and put it under the machine because you'll learn how to hold on to it. So to start with, what I do is I teach my students to just lift that seam allowance back, that excess fabric there for the seam, put a little bit of fabric glue, and this is a fabric pin, and you can find them in any quilt store, and we just go through the stack and we glue those two pieces together along the edge there. So if I have 10 pieces in the stack, I'm going to have all 10 of those glued. Now, when I lift it up, see how it doesn't move on me? So it's easier for me to push it underneath my machine. So now we're going to go to the paper piecing. I got to move my garbage can over. You're going to set these pieces to where when you pick them up that they're picked up in the same direction in which you're going to sew. Now, I can actually sew these through like this and open the paper this way, or I can flip them this way and open it so that the paper opens out, which I think is going to be a little bit easier. So that's the way I'm going to position these on my table after I get my stack done. All right. I use a size 70 needle when I'm doing paper piecing. Most people are going to tell you to use a size 80 to 90. We're working with newsprint, and it's lighter weight, so you can actually work with that smaller needle. The size 70 sharp doesn't make near as much noise going through the paper. The larger the needle, the more noise it makes. And when you do as much paper piecing as me, you don't like that noise, so you're going to try to get rid of that. We're going to bring my thread up here from my last demo. Okay, and I'm going to bring this back. Now I'm going to take the very first piece on my pile, which should be, normally it's the last piece underneath here. It should always be whatever's on the bottom in your stack. And I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to start sewing on line 1. So I'm not sure you guys can see line 1, so let's move this over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight it so you can see. This is the top of line 1. I'm going to start right up in here, about 1/4 of an inch above that line, and I'm going to sew right down line 1 down to the bottom, and then I'm going to sew a little bit past the end of the line. Okay, I'm going to pick this piece up, and we're going to start sewing. Your stitch length should be set at somewhere between 1.5 and 2.9, and it depends on your machine. So what you're trying to do with your stitch length is you want it to be tight, but if you get it too tight, you can't get a seam ripper underneath it if you need to pick something out. And if it's too loose, then when you go to pull, then it's going to pull the threads, and it just doesn't hold very well. And when you put it on a quilting frame and they tighten it up, you're going to see all of the stitches, because when you pull the paper off, it has a tendency to loosen that stitch just a little bit. So you need a tighter stitch when you're doing paper piecing. And now we're just going to start sewing. And I didn't downsize my stitch length like I said. Now we're down. And when I get done, I can actually just pick this piece up and keep chain piecing. All right. If I have a machine that has a needle cutter, then what I would do is hit that needle cut, and then I would set the paper down, and you're going to keep everything in order. I don't have a needle cutter, and these pieces are a little big and awkward, so I'm actually just going to take this and cut it like this, because it'll make it easier in the demonstration. And normally I'm used to sewing on a flat surface where this isn't flat. So now we're going to pick this piece up, and we're going to do the same thing. Just repeat it. And so when you're doing paper piecing, you repeat every step several times. some people, when they're new, like to make one piece and then go back and do all of the rest. But you want to try to do your chain piecing. That way you don't have to remember where you're at several times. Okay. So once you get these sewn on, then we have to go to the iron. All right. And we're going to actually take the iron and press this. Now you can do finger pressing, but it just doesn't do as nice of a job. And so I'm working with cotton fabrics, and they're a little bit harder to get those to press down. So we're just going to run to the iron, and I'm going to press both of these pieces. So we're going to press this open, and hopefully my iron's hot. Yeah, it's a little hot. It's going to take a second to get this to heat up. It heats up really fast for me. And then we're going to take the next piece and we're going to press this. And when you're doing your pressing, you also want to remember to keep everything pressed. So after you get done with the sewing, the first color is going to be on the top. And so a lot of times I'll flip it over so that I actually am putting the very bottom color on the top. And then when I stack, I end up with fabric number 1 on the top. Okay. Now, if you end up with it the other way, then what you're going to do is trim and then restack and then come back. And I think that's the way I'm going to teach you. So we're going to put the bottom piece on the top. We're going to pick this piece up. We're going to find line 2, and I'm going to place the fold template along there. So when I told you to sew, remember I told you to sew up above that line. Well, in traditional piecing, you actually sew from the edge of the fabric to the edge of the fabric. A lot of people in paper piecing tell you just to start past your sew line down in here. Well, when I found after doing paper piecing that I didn't like my little seams to be open, so I started sewing out past enough, and that's why we add the dashed lines to our papers. I like to sew past those dashed lines. So now, to get this to fold back, I have to get my hand underneath it, underneath the fabric. So you bring the fabric with it, and then we just take that and tear that back, and so it tears a hole right here. But don't worry about that hole because it actually makes it easier to remove the paper. Now the fabric's laying flat. I'm going to put the add a quarter ruler on there, and we're going to trim. And then we're going to move this one. So that's my bottom piece of my stack. And now we're going to keep going, working back until you get to fabric number 1 on top. So we're going to do the same thing here. Fold back, and so I'm bringing the fabric with it. Then I just lift this and I tear those stitches away from the paper. We put the add a quarter ruler on there, and then we trim. Now the other neat thing about this process by sewing past there is it also cuts all of my threads. And so when I get done with my piece, I don't have a million threads sewn into the seams on the back because they've all been trimmed off as I work through my papers. Okay, and I'm going to remove this paper clip for me. So the very next piece, I'm on section 3. So my section 3 is right in here, and when I pick up this piece, my section 3 on the paper is right here. So it goes all the way up like this. So what the sew side does for you, this is actually my sew edge, and this is the sew edge. So we just label each one of our papers with sew side right here. So we have the sew edge right along here, and we match that up. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually see the bottom here where I put those black lines. Well, that bottom matches up to the bottom of that. So now I know that I'm going to match that right about there. Okay, so I'm going to pull my paper off, and I'm going to slide this forward, and I'm going to match that up along that edge. Now see, I have plenty of fabric on this because this is a lot smaller than when we get into the big ones, so we're going to have more excess. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit more, just because I don't have to worry. But if you get it moved up, the more you move up, sometimes you'll lose the width in here that you need. But this line that I've drawn right here tells me that I have to make sure that I have fabric past this side. So when I come back and fold on that line, you can see that we have plenty of excess fabric there. So then we're going to take the next piece, put it on, and we're going to place this one in the same position. So this is one of the reasons I like to stack, is because I don't have to keep teaching myself where to position everything. Because once I get one done, then I can just copy each foundation paper after that, and it is all in the same place. Now we're going to grab our glue pen again, and remember I said you're just going to lift up that fabric along the seam allowance. That's your 1/4 inch seam allowance that you trimmed, and we're going to put just a little bit of glue in there, and now we're going to sew these pieces. We're going to open up the paper. I'm going to slip it in here. I'm starting with the last color in my stack, and that's the first one I'm going to sew. And we just sew on line 2. And then I'm going to just cut this, lay it on the back, and then we're going to open this one up. So again, we're ready to press, and I'm actually going to press these open, and I'm going to show you a couple more tricks before I let you go. All right, so we're going to press open. And when you're pressing with foundation paper, you don't have to set the seam. It's a little bit different pressing. But what you want to make sure of is that when you press it, you're opening that seam up. So you're going to push the iron basically into the seam. Don't start over here and push back, or you'll end up ironing a little fold in there along that line. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is when you're working with your foundation papers and you have papers that have a lot of this excess fabric here. Remember I told you at the beginning that I don't like a lot of excess? Well, you can actually kind of stack these up just a little bit. You have to be somewhat careful and just come out here and trim off that excess along there as you're going, because you'll find that that makes it a lot easier to handle the papers. All right, once we get that done, then we start with the paper piecing, and everything from here is just a repeat until you get to the very last piece. And that is the end of our video on foundation paper piecing. Thank you guys for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed all of the lessons on the Tea Time placemats. They're a lot of fun to make, and they're extremely decorative. And when you're done, you can use them on your tables, you can use them for placemats, you can put lamps on it. They're just really a fun thing to just hang around. And I hope you and you guys have enjoyed this.